everyone, and welcome back to the Living Well with Schizophrenia channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my experience with forced medication. But first, if you're new here, my name is Lauren and I make videos about what it's like living with schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia. If you would like to see more videos like this one, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. And also, if you would like to help support the creation of future videos like this one, please check out the link to our Patreon page. It's in the description below. We so appreciate any support you can give. It really helps us to keep growing the channel further and creating more valuable resources for everyone. Now, you may know already that YouTube gives channels the option of running ads at the beginning of their videos in order to generate a little bit extra income in order to make their channels sustainable. We've been having a little bit of a difficult time with this though, because YouTube has often been deeming our content as controversial or sensitive in nature and not suitable for advertising. And so I'm willing to bet that you did not see an ad at the beginning of this video. So this is just another way that we want to draw attention that these videos would not be possible without the support of our viewers through Patreon and through things like our GoFundMe that's going on now, which you can also find the link to in the description below. Thank you so much again for any support you can give. So what is forced medication? Technically, it's referred to as involuntary treatment. Now, it's kind of a polarizing issue where there are a lot of people who are proponents of it and there are a lot of people who are opponents of it. And there's quite strong feelings either way. So it's kind of a controversial topic to be tackling. Proponents of it usually refer to it as assisted treatment, and opponents of it usually refer to it as forced drugging or forced medication. So typically the proponents are people who are advocating for the expansion of forced medication, or in their term, assisted treatment. And there are people who are calling for the reduction of forced medication or involuntary treatment. And there are people who are calling for just the complete elimination of it. The opponents of it, and they see it as forced drugging and really unethical. So now there are two kind of different types of forced medication that I'm going to be talking about. One that is primarily what my experience has been, which is the more acute version of forced medication, where I was in a hospital and it was in the midst of an acute psychotic episode where they administered drugs against my will. But there is also the more long-term use of forced medication where someone is mandated or forced to take medications over an extended period of time under the supervision of someone or something like that, but where there is a stipulation that they need to be taking medication for an extended period of time. Okay, so I'm going to share a bit about what my personal experience with forced medication was like. So like I said before, it was in a hospital setting during an acute psychotic episode. So I was very, very unwell at the time. And, looking back, I can understand that. But what happened, I feel, was a little inexcusable. So this happened actually several points throughout this hospitalization, which was about 4 years ago now. I was brought to the hospital by the police and really wasn't given much assessment or attention or anything, trying to de-escalate things, because I was very agitated being brought by the police and very scared of being kept in a, cinder block white room with a metal bed frame. It was all very jarring, and I was getting agitated and upset by it. And I was suicidal at the time, and I was trying to harm myself repeatedly with different means. And instead of trying to talk to me and de-escalate things or whatnot, a flood of people just came rushing into the room, lifted me up by all my limbs, slammed me down onto the gurney that was in the room, strapped my arms, strapped my legs to the bed so that I couldn't move. I was in a starfish position and I couldn't move. And they administered meds by a shot into my buttocks area or the side of my thigh. And it was horrifically traumatizing. I just remember screaming at the top of my lungs to stop and to please untie me and to please not medicate me. I did not want the medication. I did not want to be there. I did not want to be held against my will. I did not want any of this. What I really needed at that time was someone to talk to me and to try to de-escalate things from a way more compassionate perspective. But what happened was this horrifyingly authoritarian approach to just sedating and medicating someone who is posing a bit of a problem. This left quite a sour taste in my mouth in terms of the concept of forced medication. And, like I said, this happened a couple times throughout that hospital stay. So that was in the emergency room. And then later on in the actual psychiatric ward, it happened again, where I was in a solitary confinement room because I was getting upset again and agitated about the symptoms that I was experiencing and about being in the hospital. And it was all just very upsetting, and I was very scared. And what happened next, again, instead of someone coming to try to talk to me, was the door slammed open and 6 huge men, security guards and nurses, rushed in and pinned me to the ground, stripped me of all my clothes so that I was completely naked, and again injected me with medication to sedate me, and I think an antipsychotic was administered as well. Again, the way this was handled was just so dehumanizing and awful, and I have struggled with it a lot ever since then, in terms of, dealing with the trauma of it all, in terms of dealing with what it means for my trust in the medical system and in the psychiatric care facilities that are supposed to be helping me and people like me, people who are experiencing things like me. And, it just made me very, very fearful of the system and of the people who are allegedly there to help and support me through this difficult period of my illness. I think that's a really important thing to consider when you're dealing with the topic of forced medication is, at what cost? Because undoubtedly, if you treat someone that way, and if you violate their trust so immensely like that, you're going to lose their trust going forward. And, part of the therapeutic relationship when treating mental illnesses is so contingent upon this relationship, this therapeutic relationship. And so you are kind of just shattering that when you take the approach to just, aggressively, forcibly drug the patient. And so I feel that there is so much room that has not been adequately explored in terms of de-escalation techniques before it gets to the point of forced medication. Because looking back, I understand that I did need medication in those instances. And maybe it was the right thing that I got medication, but it absolutely was not the right thing how it was given to me and how I was not a part of the choice in any way, shape, or form. My rights were completely violated in both those instances. And it was just both times were just really dehumanizing and awful experiences. And I just feel that if a more compassionate approach was taken and there was a lot more attempts at de-escalation and about reaching me and communicating with me, I feel that maybe we could have gotten to the same point of me agreeing to take medication because they explained to me why it was necessary and how it would help me. Because, again, like I said, I was feeling so scared. And so to have this happen on top of that just made me tenfold more scared and just so fearful of my surroundings, so fearful of the system, and it was just really awful. So I feel that there's so much room for just trying harder, the system and the medical professionals just trying harder to treat the patient as a person and to not take away their rights through forced medication, because what happened to me in the hospital can only be described as forced medication. There's no way that a proponent of assisted treatment would call this assisted treatment, because, no one was assisting me and this wasn't healthy treatment. This was forced drugging or forced medication. I talked about there being the acute forced medication, which is what I experienced. And then I also talked about there being the more long-term, prolonged assisted treatment or forced medication or whatever you want to call it. I want to talk a bit more about that too, because we did some research on this video, and there are just so many studies out there that provide evidence both for assisted treatment or forced medication and both evidence against it. And, it's just such a conflicting area right now in terms of the mental health care system and mental health care treatment. And so, we're really in this phase where we need to flesh out the ethics of everything. And we need to flesh out where our values lie and how our stance on this position affects our values and is affected by our values. Okay, so in terms of the more long-term involuntary treatment methods, there are a multitude of different ways that this can be went about. The most common are kind of community treatment orders or some semblance thereof, whether it's conservatorship in the United States or some sort of community treatment order. Now, I do have some experience with this, not necessarily under a strict community treatment order, but more under the coercion or, threat of a community treatment order. So my psychiatrist years back was worried about me not being super great at taking my medication regularly. And, because I was having symptoms and I was scared of the medication because I thought it was poison and all that kind of stuff. And so he said to me, he was like, Lauren, I could put you on a community treatment order right now, and we could just, have you mandated to take your medication as prescribed, or, you'd be hospitalized. And obviously my red flags went flinging up and was like, no. And he knew that. He knew that I was very opposed to that kind of thing. But he was like, or we could figure out something else together that feels better for both of us. Now, he did take a really good approach, and I do appreciate the approach that he took in terms of wanting to come up with something with me, in collaboration with me, that felt good for me. And what we ended up coming up with was that I would go to the pharmacy every day to take I would go to the clinic every day to take my medication there under the supervision of a nurse. And when they were closed, I would go to the local pharmacy to take my medication there under the supervision of the pharmacist. And so it was kind of this checks and balances system where someone was always witnessing that I was taking my medication and then reporting back to him so that he knew if I was taking my medication or not. Now, this felt okay to me at the time because it felt like I was making that decision in conjunction with him. But this was something that is used very often in psychiatry in terms of coercion of taking medication, where the threat of a community treatment or the threat of hospitalization leads the patient to take their medication as prescribed so as to avoid that threat. This seems harmless. This seems like, if this happens, this will, or if this doesn't happen, this will happen. And, that's kind of okay to wrap your mind around, but that's not really taking into account the power dynamics that are at play between a psychiatrist or a doctor and the patient. And oftentimes the patient hears what the doctor is saying and reacts in fear or reacts, emotionally or reacts as if this figure of authority is telling them to do something. And so coercion is kind of a murky area in terms of forced medication. And, it's something to be aware of if you're a medical professional and you are trying to encourage your patient to take their medication. It's important to step back sometimes and reevaluate the ethics of what you're doing in order to encourage them to do so. So another way that this kind of coercion can happen is when a patient just doesn't really understand what treatments are voluntary and what are involuntary and what their rights are. Now, this happened to me too in the hospital 4 years ago or so, where my psychiatrist was saying to me, so I was refusing food and medication for fear of being poisoned by both. And so I wasn't eating. And so my psychiatrist said to me, if you don't start eating, we're going to give you ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy, or sometimes referred to as shock treatment or whatnot. That scared me so much because I have had ECT before and it wasn't a good experience for me. It helped some people, but it wasn't a good experience for me. And I did not want ECT again. So that scared me to the point where I was like, oh my God, I have to eat now. Like, he's forcing me to eat. I'm going to die. Like, it just was this awful spiral. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust the hospital. It was awful. But I didn't understand that he had no right to be threatening me with that. He could not force me to get ECT because I had the right to refuse that. But the way the information was presented to me, it felt like it was an involuntary process, and it felt like I had no say in the matter. So, this is another way where we really need to be mindful of how coercion is happening in terms of forced medication or in terms of involuntary treatment. So part of the research that we did for this video was reading the involuntary treatment section of this book, Surviving Schizophrenia, which we've recommended before as well. I had a bit of a hard time reading this chapter of this book because I have a hard time with a lot of the things. So the author of this book is a proponent of involuntary treatment, and he refers to it as assisted treatment. And he goes through a lot of different statistics and studies and whatnot that support this view. And he does actually a pretty good job of giving you a detailed understanding of the benefits to the greater society in terms of having less recidivism in terms of crime with people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia, having less violent crimes with people who are living with schizophrenia, having lower rates of homelessness for people who are living with schizophrenia, and just generally proving that there is more stability in terms of people who are receiving assisted treatment or involuntary treatment. Reading through this chapter, if I were to completely remove myself of any experience with this topic and to just take a kind of a cold look at the statistics and figures that he's presenting, I might consider it as a viable option. But the problem is that, reading this section, all I could think was, this is completely devoid of any empathy for the people who are experiencing this illness. I think that's a major problem in terms of the conversation around forced medication or around involuntary treatment. I can understand that there is a benefit to society as a whole because we don't have to deal as much with the problems that people who are living with schizophrenia potentially pose society. But to me, that feels so wrong, and that does not feel like the answer to forcibly medicate these people to subdue them in terms of society's view. That doesn't feel right to me, and that doesn't feel ethical. I think that, again, like I said before, there is so much unexplored room in terms of, for the acute episodes, de-escalation, and for the long-term treatment orders, education, and discussing treatment options and treatment benefits with the patient instead of just forcing them to take their medication against their will. It was very commonplace 50 years or so ago to sterilize people with mental illness, with severe mental illness. And that was seen as okay because, why would we want to increase the risk of passing on a severe mental illness to their offspring? And, that's serving the greater society well in terms of, reducing the amount of severe mental illness. But that is completely ignoring the fact that you are robbing this individual of their rights and freedoms and their freedom to choose their own life path and if they want to have children or not. And likewise, when we forcibly medicate people, we are robbing them of their freedom of choice as well and their freedom to live how they see fit. If it was a matter of there being this miracle drug that just completely eradicated symptoms and had no side effects or anything and did no harm to the person, I would think, okay, maybe I can get on board with forced medication a little bit more in order to get the person to a point of stability where they can understand why that medication is a benefit for them. But this is not the case. Psychiatric medication is no joke. Like, I have been on medications that have left me drooling and so sedated. I felt like a zombie. I did not feel like a person. And if somebody was forcing me to be on that medication against my will, that is worse than being in prison or being in a hospital or anything like that. And so I think that as a society, we need to step up. We can't just fall back on forcibly medicating these people in terms of reducing the amount of woes they cause society. We need to figure out how to better accommodate these people within society. It shouldn't be a matter of, subduing them or drugging them to make them fit in better. It should be a matter of figuring out how we can, as a society, come together to support these individuals in a better way. So I think I've made it pretty clear where I lie in terms of the debate around forced medication. I am strongly for the reduction of it. Now, that said, I don't think I'm completely for the elimination of it, because there are times I understand where, someone is a direct harm to themselves or to other people especially, and medication may need to be administered in order to either calm the situation down in this acute phase, or to keep everyone safe, or in order to prevent harm to other people. But that said, I still think that there is so much room for working with the individual, and forced medication should never be a frontline defense, and it should never even be second or third on the list in terms of approaches that you take. There is so many things that you need to do before it gets to a point of forced medication. So now, again, when we were doing our research on this, we found that as a polarizing topic, there were a lot of different national organizations, national mental health organizations that have taken a stance one way or the other. And we found that, it was kind of interesting that these huge mental health organizations are primarily funded by big pharma, big pharmacy, big pharmaceuticals. And how ethical is that they are being directly funded by pharmaceutical companies, and they are proponents of forced medication, which is exactly what big pharma would want, people being forced to take their product. And so I just had a bit of a uncomfortable reaction to that. And I feel that, these positions that these organizations are taking are a little bit devoid of empathy for the people who it actually affects. And so I just want to encourage a lot more conversation around the use of these treatment methods, and, a lot more reflection by the medical community in terms of how they're administering it and how they're approaching things with their patients. And also, if you are a patient, you need to be ready to advocate for yourself in this position, or you need to be ready to find people who will go to bat for you. So there are patient advocacy organizations across the country who are set up to help advocate for you in terms of instances where you feel that forced medication was used improperly. So thank you so much for watching that very long video. I hope that it was, helpful or insightful in some way. And something that I really want to point out is that hopefully medical professionals are going to be watching this, and they're going to be learning from this. And what I would really love is if they could learn from you all as well. So if you have any experiences with involuntary treatment, whether it's good or bad or neutral, I would really, really love it if you felt comfortable to share it in the comments below so that, hopefully medical professionals or people in the industry can learn more from your experiences as well. Thank you so much for participating in this conversation. So if you like this video or found it insightful at all, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and also make sure to subscribe so as not to miss any future videos. Also, just a quick reminder again that if you would like to help support the creation of videos like this one, please check out the link to our Patreon page. It's in the description below. Thank you so much again for watching, and as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. See you in the next video. Bye.